everyone! I hope everyone is safe at home with their families. I thought I would share a little video with you of how to make an apple pie so you can follow along at home if you like. Okay, so first you'll want to measure out your dry ingredients. I already measured them out, but you want 3 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. So that's already in here. The next thing to add in is butter. And it's really helpful if your butter is really cold. So if you have time beforehand, you can pop it in the freezer for an hour and then it'll cut up really nicely. So that's what we'll do next. Okay, so that was 2 sticks of butter cut up into small pieces like this. So the next thing is to blend it all together. You can do this by just using your hands, which is what I'm gonna do. You can also take 2 knives and sort of do it like this, all right? I'm gonna do it with my hands, and then when we're done, we want it to kind of look grainy, almost like kind of wet sand, all right? So we'll go ahead and start mixing all the ingredients. Just sort of squishing the butter between your fingers and trying to incorporate it with all the dry ingredients. So, like I said, it should look sort of like wet sand when you're done. And kind of the key is hoping that each bit of butter is no bigger than a pea size. So I think we've done that. It takes a little bit of time to work it. But the next thing to do is to add water. So before I even started, I put ice in my water because again, you really want the butter and the water to be really cold. So with the water, we're gonna add a 1/2 cup of water and we'll add it bit by bit until it feels like the dough is coming together. Okay, so my test for trying to see if it's coming together is seeing if I can put a big clump together, and if it's still falling apart, if it's still acting kind of like sand, then you need to add a little bit more water. So I'm gonna keep going just until it's coming together. But the key is you don't want it to be too wet. You don't want to put too much water in. So that's why we're doing it bit by bit and then testing it. So it's still kind of sandy. So we'll keep putting more in. Make sure your ice doesn't go in there. Okay. All right. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to start separating the dough into 2 parts because today I wanted to make an apple pie and it needs a bottom crust and a top crust. So it seems like this might be the last bit of water I'm adding. And then in the bowl, I'm going to start separating it into 2 different parts. And it seems like it's still a little bit dry in some parts, but it is starting to come together so that if I squeeze it and just leave it, it should mostly stay together, okay? So the next thing to do is to take these 2 parts. Again, I've divided the bowl in half between the top crust and the bottom crust. And now you want the dough to chill a little bit before you roll it out, because again, the dough being cold is really helpful. So I'm gonna take a big ball of this and I'm gonna saran wrap it and put it in the fridge. Okay, so I'm gonna take each one of these, and again, it's staying together. And even if it's still a little crumbly, this will help it stay together by putting it in the fridge in saran wrap. So I'm gonna flatten it into sort of a disc because we're gonna roll it out when it's done chilling. So again, you wanna kind of put it in a disc, cover it in saran wrap, and your counter will get messy and your hands will get messy, and that's okay. Okay, and then actually once it's in the saran wrap, I like to sort of flatten it even more and kind of use the plastic to do this. Okay, so that it should be about that thick and it's ready to go in the fridge. So the dough has been chilling for about 30 minutes. You don't want it to let it chill too long and get too cold because you still want to be able to roll it out, but it's pretty ready to go. So I'm going to take it out of the saran wrap and start rolling it with my rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can also use a bottle, right? You can really use anything that has a flat surface that'll work. Okay, So the first thing you want to do when it gets a little bit messy is put some flour out on your surface. This will help the dough from sticking to your rolling pin or whatever you're using to roll it out with. So I usually put it on the surface, on top of the dough, and then I like to sprinkle a little bit on the rolling pin too. So this takes some time, but ideally you want to roll it out so it's not too thick anymore, and hopefully it also keeps sort of a circle shape so that it'll fit correctly in your pie tin. So I'm going to start rolling it out. So as I was rolling it out, you saw that I was really generous with the flour and used a lot of it. Once it's time to get the crust in your pie tin though, it's probably a good idea to try to get some of that excess flour off. So you washed your hands beforehand, so now you can just sort of safely wipe it off. But now I'm gonna try to get this into the pie pan without it tearing or breaking. And this is where it's kind of helpful that your dough was chilled, because if it was really warm, it would stretch and break apart. So one nice way to try to do this is to actually use your rolling pin and really gently lift it using that. So you sort of roll it onto the pin and then you unroll it into your pie tin. Hopefully it's staying together nicely enough that you can kind of center it on the pie tin now, but you have to be really careful as you do that so that you don't rip anything. But if you do rip any of the dough, you can just take part from the outside, and say I had a rip over here, I could just patch it up with some of the excess dough. Okay, so I usually have excess dough, so now I'm gonna cut with scissors some of the dough around the outside of the edge. Now you can start making whatever filling you want to put into your pie. I mostly wanted to show you how to make a pie crust, and then if you want to make an apple pie, you can follow along with the recipe I'm using, but you could also put a ton of other things in here. You could make a pear pie, you can take any canned peaches you might have, for example, anything sweet that you want to put into it. And once you put in your sweet fruit filling, we're going to take the top crust and put it on the top. So before you start making your filling, it's a good idea to preheat your oven now. So for most pies, whatever the recipe calls for, it's probably something like 350 or 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So now is the time to do that, to preheat your oven. And I'm gonna start making my apple pie filling. One more thing, it might be a good idea for you, now that you've done the bottom crust, to, if you can, squeeze this back into your fridge or even your freezer. Sometimes if it sits out, it'll get really warm, and then it might sort of fall apart when you're trying to combine it with the top crust. So time to preheat your oven and then put this in a cold place. So our filling is done, and I put my apple pie filling in the bottom crust that was chilling in the fridge. And now it's time to assemble the whole pie. This is our final step. So we're gonna take the top crust, and the same way we did it on the bottom, try to center it on the top so that it matches the overhang of the dough over the pie tin, okay? So that looks pretty centered to me. And I'm gonna do the same thing I did earlier, which is to cut off the excess. Okay, so now we're gonna crimp the bottom crust and the top crust together. There's lots of ways to do this. Sometimes people will just take a fork and they'll just sort of like put it around to seal the edges. I'm gonna show you a way that I like to do it. All right, so the first thing you wanna do is sort of fold under, okay? So if you can see what I'm doing, I'm just sort of rolling the two bits together, and I'm actually folding it under this way and then kind of resting it on the edge of the pie plate or tin. Okay. So now you should have sort of this this nice folded over edge, but it's not sealed yet. So now you want to really press down on the outside of the crust to make it seal down so that when it's in the oven and all of the juices are bubbling, nothing is escaping, all right? So the way that I like to do this is kind of something I learned, is I use my knuckle and I sort of press it that way, okay? So you put one knuckle in and then you use your other hand to try to give some pressure against it. So we now have everything crimped in place, and the last thing to do is to cut a few different holes in the top of the crust to let steam escape when the pie's in the oven. So I usually like to do 5 of them, sort of a star pattern on top. And make sure you actually do cut all the way through and not just put a little divot on top. And there you have it. So you're ready to go in the oven. And it's done. I hope you had a great time if you followed along with me at home. I think baking is one of the best things to do when you're home, and it's something you can enjoy either on your own or with someone at home too. So hopefully everybody is staying safe. We all miss you, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.